What's up, gang? Brad Bodnerchuk back again with a brand new podcast where we dissect and dive into everything leadership. Today, I want to talk about vulnerability. Vulnerability comes up a lot in my work, and I joked the other day when I was posting on Instagram about that. I said, it comes up a lot for me. Well, of course it does because I bring it up a lot. But I do hear it in and around other circles. I hear it from other leadership coaches. I hear it within executive meetings, which I think is a great thing. I think the fact that this is now becoming part of our repertoire and part of the focus is super important. And I just want to offer a couple stories or a couple anecdotes of my own to show how vulnerability is actually a really powerful tool to create connection. And then with that connection, creating growth and creating steps towards the ultimate vision that you're working towards. So today I want to share a story that I haven't actually told on record ever. I think maybe 6 people in the entire world know about it. And it's not this massively embarrassing story that I've hidden from the outside world, but it is something that stayed with me. And it's a great example of vulnerability and how that can be a powerful move as opposed to a weakness move. So I'm going to cut to the chase and get right to the story. In 2006, I and myself and my stepbrother, I should say, we moved to London, England, and we moved there with no real plan. I can't speak for him, but I didn't really have a plan. I was young and I was definitely naive, and I was probably very ignorant as well in regards to what life in London was going to look like. I did know that for me to survive there, I was going to have to work. I was going to have to get a job. And I was lucky enough to have a working visa that would afford me the ability to do that. Obviously, jobs aren't given. You need to get picked out of the crowd to get selected for X role. So I was in the interview process to become, I know this is going to sound strange to some of you that know me, and it sounds strange even saying it now, but I was in the interview process to become a real estate agent, essentially. And for those of you that don't know, in London, there are real estate sales and real estate rentals. Obviously, the rental market is huge in the UK, especially in hubs like London. And I was being essentially interviewed, or I was applying to get a sales role as a rental agent, or what they call a lettings agent. And the first phase of this interview was a group interview, which I had never been a part of before. And admittedly, I was super excited about it. I love being around people. I love being in groups. I think it's a great opportunity for me to learn from others, but also inject a bit of my own personality and let people know who I am. So setting is me and roughly, I'm going to say between 15 and 18 other individuals, maybe even upwards of 25. And we're sitting around the room and there's a few of the company representatives, and they're obviously facilitating the interview and they're asking questions. And I believe we even did some role playing. I could be mistaken, but there is this one story that really sticks out. And this is what I'm sharing with you today. The vulnerability piece. So it's important that I do note this because I skipped over it, and it's incredibly important in regards to the story. Before I left Canada, before I left Nova Scotia, I had someone kind of give me some inside scoops on, just so you know, when you're in the UK or when you're in London, certain things mean different things. And one of the things that someone said to me was, did you know that they refer to dessert sometimes as pudding? And I remember them saying it. I can actually vividly remember the exact environment I was in when this was shared with me, but it obviously didn't land enough. And here's why. We're in the interview. There's, again, it doesn't really matter how many people, but let's just, for argument's sake, let's say 20 people. And the question is, what is your favorite pudding? Now, remember, we're in the UK. We're in London. I would guess 85% of the people there are from the UK, or at the very least, they're European, and they probably have heard this question before. The question was, what is your favorite pudding? So to them, that was a normal question. It's like asking, what's your favorite dessert? Which would be, again, a very normal question here in North America and probably most parts of the world that don't call it something else. So we're going around the circle. People are asking, and I either wasn't paying attention or perhaps I was one of the first people to answer. But I remember there was a young woman from Vancouver who was sitting next to me, and she got to go first. And I've always wanted to figure out her name and reach out to her and ask her if she did this on purpose or if she just got away with it. So when it came to her, her answer was, in regards to what is your favorite pudding, her answer was chocolate. Okay. Interesting answer, because chocolate, just being chocolate, could be a dessert. So very good answer, correct, and actually answers the question. But she also could have thought they were talking about what we refer to as actual like pudding snacks, which you have different flavors. You have chocolate, you have butterscotch, and you have vanilla. Here's where it goes next. I'm sitting literally right to her left, and now they're looking at me. Hey, Brad, what is your favorite pudding? And I say vanilla. And as soon as I said it, I noticed there was a bit of confusion, some furrowed brows, and I remember the people facilitating the interview kind of shook their head a little bit and went right on to the next person. And I was sitting there thinking, what the hell did I just do? Did I answer it wrong? Is vanilla not a good flavor of pudding? Should I have chose something else? And then it hit me almost instantly. I said to myself something like, you idiot. Pudding means dessert. And you just told them vanilla. That's not a dessert. That's a flavor of pudding. That's not what they're asking you. Anyway, you can imagine I was quite embarrassed because out of the 20 people, everyone else is giving quote unquote normal answers. Everyone else is giving proper answers to what is your favorite dessert. And I'm over here, the guy from Canada who seems pretty confident and just says vanilla like it's normal. And everyone's thinking, what the heck? What the heck does that mean? So we go around, everyone finishes, everyone shares what their favorite pudding is and answers it accurately or appropriately. And at some point during the remaining time in the session, I actually stand up in front of everybody and I raise my hand. And I'm not, this is almost like an out of body experience. I didn't think of this. I didn't say to myself, oh, I need to make sure everyone knows this, that I just got confused. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I felt compelled to be vulnerable in that moment. And I was. I stood up and I raised my hand and I said, sorry to interrupt. I just have to let you know that I didn't mean vanilla is my favorite pudding. I thought you meant pudding like we refer to in Canada, which is almost like a custard. And I was saying that's my favorite flavor because the person right ahead of me said chocolate. I said vanilla. Anyway, I apologize. I get it. My favorite dessert, my favorite pudding is strawberry rhubarb pie. In that moment, I was a bit naked. I was letting them know that, hey, I gave a silly answer. I realize now that it was silly, and I'm going to step up and just say, hey, I apologize. No harm, no foul, but I want you to know that I did recognize that I made a mistake. Obviously, no one was harmed in the mistake, just me and my ego a bit, but I owned it. I stepped up in front of the crowd and said, I'm sorry, I missed the mark on that. Let's try it again. It's strawberry rhubarb pie. Cut to the end, I end up getting the job, which I really do, honestly, I attribute to that. I attribute to that vulnerability piece. It takes a lot. And this is me right now as 41-year-old Brad, part of me, applauding that version of Brad, because it was repetitions like that. It was vulnerability like that that's allowed me to show up how I am today for myself, for my family, for my partner, for my clients. And I'm proud of what I did, as unconscious as it was. And I didn't back then, again, we're talking 2006. I don't know if I even understood what vulnerability even meant. And if anything, I probably thought it was just, oh, you're being a victim if you're trying to be vulnerable. Or further to that, you're actually just being weak. That's not a strong thing to do. But no, it was an incredibly strong thing to do. It was incredibly strong to stand up and say, I got it wrong. I realize that. I kind of sound silly when I said it, and I don't want to be silly. I want to be authentic and let you know that I messed up, and that's okay. And again, I'm confident that the reason that I ended up getting that job, which ended up being a phenomenal job and one I probably should never have gotten, but I really am convinced that I got it because I was able to, in a moment, be vulnerable. And I don't know if anyone else in that room would have done the same thing had they made the mistake. And again, I'm not trying to pump my own tires here, but I am applauding that Brad for doing that. It was really special and really incredible. And it obviously stayed with me, and it's impacted me, and it's encouraged me to be more vulnerable. And I want for you all listening to take something from that. And what I want for you to take from it is when we mess up, and albeit what's your favorite pudding, it's pretty inconsequential. No one's getting hurt. I didn't offend anybody. It was just me. It was just me who sat there and felt silly. But I encourage you, whenever you have a moment, to recognize that you were wrong, recognize that you misspoke, recognize that you could have handled something differently, recognize that you're just learning. All of these things and many, many more are ways in which you can show up in a vulnerable way. And I see it in bits and pieces now, kind of sprinkled amongst the work that I do with the clients that I'm lucky enough to have, them being vulnerable with each other. And I'm really pushing them even more to be even more vulnerable. And what that looks like in an executive meeting is when you either, again, when you do misspeak and you, instead of sitting there and acting like it's nothing, it is something, and you should step into that, and you should be vulnerable and saying, hey, this is tough for me to do, but I want to do that over again. I feel like I didn't answer that the way I wanted to, or I feel like I dropped the ball with that, or I feel like I underperformed, whatever it may be. Or if someone's acting a certain way, being vulnerable enough to say, hey, when you do that, it actually really impacts me, as opposed to walking around and acting like it's okay. Being vulnerable allows people to see you more for you and less for just the person that they feel you're trying to show up as. Or if you look at it again from a business standpoint or an executive leadership group standpoint, they see you outside of just your title. So sure, you're the CFO, but you're also a person who maybe has a family, who definitely has feelings, who definitely has a past, who definitely has things that trigger them, who definitely isn't always right. And I feel like when I was vulnerable in that moment, it allowed for the decision makers to go, oh, wow, this person's really real and authentic. And as I say that out loud, I really should be dipping into that characteristic of mine more so that I can show up more and more with more and more authenticity part of me. And I know through experience that that's what vulnerability allows for. That's what vulnerability promotes. It promotes authenticity. And guess what people love? People love authenticity. Guess what people hate? Fake. They hate feeling like they're being tricked or sold something. And if you can show up in a vulnerable way, if you can show up and just be, I don't know why I use the word naked, but if you know what I mean, just raw and uncut, and this is who I am, and yes, I made a mistake. That is such a beautiful human thing to do. And other human beings will naturally, from a social, psychological stance, they'll naturally be intrigued by that and want to be around it. And for some reason, I always think of musicians when they're actually performing, say to a live crowd. That's a very vulnerable place to be. But then what is on the other side of that vulnerability is this authenticity. It's just them. It's just them doing themselves. And what happens? You have people raging, like raging lunatics in the crowd. They want to get close. They want to take photos. They're singing along. They're so engaged. They are so bought in. And that is a recipe as leaders, and definitely as a leadership coach, that I am watching all of the time to see what is it about that's happening right now that's causing all of these people to fall in line, that's causing all of these people to be such staunch supporters and just think like, oh my gosh, what they're doing is incredible, and I would pay money and I would wait hours and I would support them through thick. Like, that's what we want to create in our businesses. We want people to buy in to not only the vision, but the people that are setting the vision. And that's the reality for the leadership groups that I work with, not only for the direct reports and the frontline staff, but also each other, meaning they have to buy into each other. They have to believe in each other. And if there is no vulnerability, there likely is no authenticity. And if there is no authenticity, it's very, very difficult to get someone to buy in or to actually, how do I say this? Like believe what you're selling, for lack of a better term. So be vulnerable. If you forgot what pudding meant because you just got off of the plane 3 days ago and you're in a whole new country, sure, they speak English, thankfully, but just be authentic. First, be vulnerable, which allows you to be authentic. And maybe at times they interchange. Maybe being authentic is part vulnerability. I don't know if it's the cart before the horse or the chicken and the egg, but you get what I'm saying. So I want to close off my podcast moving forward with something tangible for all of you, whether you're in business or whether you listen to this podcast because you're just a great friend and you support me, and which is great. And thank you so much for that. I want to give everyone here a plan of action. The plan of action is over the next week, I would suggest sooner than later, find one way to be vulnerable. Find one opportunity to either say, hey, I dropped the ball. I feel like I underperformed. I'm sorry how I showed up. I messed up, whatever it may be. And don't force it. Like, actually be, again, I'll use the word authentic, be brutally authentic with it and let it be felt. And when you do that, people will see you completely differently and it will draw them to you. It will make them feel more and more compelled to align with you, more and more compelled to, again, to be close to you. Again, whatever is appropriate in regards to that reference. So the plan of action is find a way to be vulnerable. And it can be as simple as, I'm sorry I dropped the ball, or I'm sorry how I acted. It doesn't always have to be an apology. It's just something. Even the other day, I had a president that I work with say, I'm really struggling right now, to his executive group, and it stuck with me. And what a vulnerable thing to say for a president and CEO of a company to his leadership group. And that was him being 100% vulnerable and 100% authentic. And guess what that did to the entire room, including myself? See him in a completely different light, and also feel like, hey, it's okay for all of us to be vulnerable. So set the tone, find an opportunity to be vulnerable, and just watch what happens around you. That's it. If you enjoyed this podcast, it would mean the absolute world to me if you would share it out to someone else who you also think might enjoy it. Also, if you haven't, it would mean the world to me, again, if you would rate the podcast and leave a comment. That really helps the analytics. I'm sure you hear that on all the podcasts you listen to, but it just is the reality. Your support, whether it's clicks, likes, shares, subscribes, all of those things truly help me and this podcast, and that would mean so much to me. You have the plan of action. Now you have this silly story of mine from the UK, and now you have the rest of your day to go attack. I appreciate you, and I'm always here to support you, your vision, and your goals. And I encourage you to go out, seek growth, and you know what else to do. Be good and do good. Peace.